Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're about 2 minutes till 9. It would help us get started on time if you could please find your seats. Thank you.
I'm born and raised in Middle Tennessee, and I've seen a lot of change. Friends and family have been priced out of their homes, pushed further away from their jobs, and transportation options.
So commuting's important, but what a lot of people don't understand is that the traffic can sometimes impede our ability to get to the scenes that we need to get to.
I recognize that as I age, that my driving skills will decline and driving will become more stressful for me.
I'm the manager here. Since we're a small shop, we order stock as we need it. It's becoming a struggle to schedule deliveries around traffic.
I'm a hard worker, and I try to be reliable, but sometimes the bus just doesn't run when I need to get to work.
I sleep about 7 hours. Then I might work for another 8 or 9, and then I'm on the road commuting for another 2.
I live near a busy street, and every day I see people run across 5 lanes of traffic because there isn't a convenient crosswalk to use.
I just don't understand why this isn't a bigger part of the conversation that we're having about traffic safety.
Why can't everyone benefit from economic growth?
Why aren't there more options for people like me?
Why are we cutting services when the region's growing so fast?
Why can't our streets be safer?
Why can't I have more hours in the day to spend with family?
Why can't we solve this?
Look, I get it. If you don't want to use the bus, that's fine. But there are a lot of people like me who count on it, and a growing number of people who are just tired of driving everywhere. I'm all for improving roads, but we need more public transit too.
We need more affordable options for people who've been here their whole life.
We shouldn't have to read about people getting hurt or even killed trying to be active.
I can't imagine how, but it's time we fixed the inner loop.
Other cities have figured this out. We need to think big, and we need to take big action.
It is no secret. The greater Nashville area is growing fast. Some say too fast, while others work hard to attract more jobs and investment. What we all agree on is that traffic congestion is getting worse. More people, more vehicles, and more construction make it a difficult journey for even the most experienced commuter. Take it from me. I'm Dave Nichols. I spent a dozen years covering Nashville traffic on radio and TV. Finding the right solutions is critical to our quality of life. But what are the right solutions? What is the right mix of investments that will address your personal challenges with transportation? What are you willing to contribute in order to see a significant improvement? Now's the time to act. Public officials hear you. They are listening. and they have pledged to work together to find common ground. Share your issues, your ideas, and weigh in on the options.
The mayors of Middle Tennessee know that this is an important issue.
I represent people just like you who expect us to solve this together.
I ran for office to make a difference. I bet we can solve this together.
A unified and regional approach is critical to meeting this challenge. Together, we can solve this problem.
We've invested too much not to solve this together.
I'm ready for us to solve this together.
Tennessee is counting on us to do this together.
Not sure who said it first, but I agree. We aren't sitting in traffic. We are the traffic. It's a perfect reminder that we all have a personal stake in this. If we're going to find solutions, we'll need to work together to draft a unified plan that works for all Middle Tennesseans. Be a part of the solution.
Good morning. How was your drive? Ride, bicycling, motorcycling, however you got here this morning. I hope you avoided at least some of the problems that were along the way as you came here this morning. Welcome to the regional convening that is hosted by the Greater Nashville Regional Council. I'm Dave Nichols. I believe that together we can solve these problems together because we all know that transportation is a big issue in Middle Tennessee. I'm honored to be here this morning to serve as your master of ceremonies as we look to re-energize the important conversations we need to have about traffic and roadway safety and access to opportunity. If you look there at your table, you will find at your place a program for today's event, a copy of highlights from the regional plan that was adopted by area mayors and transportation officials in 2016. You will also find that little card. That is a transit pass. It is good throughout the month of November for all rides on We Go Public Transit, the Murfreesboro Rover, and the Franklin Transit Authority. This is a valuable little card. Please do not lose it. Please do not put it on eBay. It is intended to encourage you to get out and learn about the public transit systems in our area as we look for solutions to our traffic problems. There are about 200 folks here this morning, and we are so happy that you have come. We have elected officials, we have agency leaders from local, state, and federal levels of government, business, and corporate leaders, nonprofit partners, and community advocates. We are gathered to share ideas about how to solve our transportation challenges. Someone asked me once when I first became concerned with traffic in Nashville, I said, well, I moved here in 1978, so about then. And those of us who've been here a while have seen things change dramatically in many ways, other things not change so much. I think one of the thoughts we want to keep in mind is while the combination of factors that we are experiencing and the timing of them may be somewhat unique, each component of our traffic issues has been and is being experienced by cities and regions all across the nation. There is knowledge that we can tap into and put to use. My younger son moved to Denver last year. They had a little snow earlier this week. I was talking to him on the phone last night. You know what he said? I can't believe these drivers in Denver. I said, but that's what everybody says about the drivers in Nashville. Oh no, these are worse, these are worse. So it's not a totally unique perception that we have, but it is something that we're going to need to work together to deal with. Few fun facts to get us started this morning that have been compiled by the staff. Nashville and its surrounding counties are home to nearly 2 million people who together travel an average of 33 miles and 48 minutes per day. Now think about that. That's an average. A lot of those 2 million people don't ever leave the house. So for the average to be 33 miles and 48 minutes a day, a lot of us are spending a lot of time out there. Over 1,600 bridges going across more than 13,000 miles of roadway. Between 2010 and 2040, that same area is seeing a 76% increase in population and an 86% increase in volume on our roadways. travel speeds slowing by 26%, and a 162% increase in the miles traveled in congested conditions on our current trajectory. Wouldn't this be a good time to start working on solutions? This amount of change can be overwhelming, and while the solutions to our traffic problems can seem too complicated at times, our program today has a very simple message. We can solve this together, and we must. The transportation issue is too big and too complex for any one organization or agency to solve alone. It will require a coordinated effort among government, business, and community advocates to co-create a unified plan. It will require those same partners to identify their respective roles and responsibilities and the necessary resources to put that plan into action. The Greater Nashville Regional Council is positioned to facilitate that process as it embarks upon a major update to the region's federally required transportation plan. Today's event represents a public launch of that effort and an invitation to the leaders in this room to become partners, even owners, in the process. To get us started, we have some extraordinary people who are giving their time to be here this morning. Let me welcome the first of them from beautiful Williamson County, Franklin Mayor Ken Moore, to come to the stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Ken Moore. I am the mayor of Franklin and a proud member of the Greater Nashville Regional Council. And I'm also part of the 5%. Who's part of the 5% this morning? I'm part of the 5% that ride shared today to this location. So if you're part of that 5%, raise your hand. I see a lot of people. Great, good. In a short moment, I'm going to have the opportunity to introduce Governor Bill Lee. But before I do that, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guests who have traveled from many different areas of the country to share their experiences with us today. And I also want to thank each and every one of you for being so invested in transportation issues and solutions. For the past few years, I've had the opportunity to chair the Greater Nashville Regional Council Mayor Caucus, which provided an opportunity for our local mayors, county and city to build relationships with each other and also build relationships with state leadership. Among many of the issues that the caucus has considered, transportation probably stands out as one of the most important that we've discussed. And together, the area mayors have championed many causes. And I think that as I read through this list in just a moment, you're going to be impressed that we are making progress, but we're not making enough progress. So it started in 2009 when we helped pass enabling legislation for the Regional Transportation Authority as we began to build the necessary organizational capacity to fund, build, and implement public transit within our counties. Then we came together in 2016 as members of the region's Transportation Policy Board, some known as the MPO, to adopt an $8.5 million multimodal plan to guide improvements into roads, transit, and technology for years to come. And later that same year, we came together as members of the Regional Transportation Authority to adopt in motion a strategic plan to implement that transit component of the Regional Transportation Plan adopted earlier that year. Then in 2017, we came together again to support the Improve Act. That legislation not only provided much needed revenue to fund a backlog of road projects, it also paved the way for local communities to work together to establish dedicated funding to expand and modernize our public transportation options for our residents and workforce and visitors. While the first attempt at the ballot was not successful as far as dedicated funding, this was one step, and we must continue to work to move forward. And so we're gathered here today as a demonstration of our commitment to the lessons we've learned so far, and a resolve is to continue to find solutions despite the difficulty of the task. We mayors know, and I think everyone in this room knows, that we must find a way to come together to solve the issue. And we have an opportunity to join our efforts and to leverage our collective ideas into a unified plan that works for Middle Tennessee. A plan that not only addresses the needs of a daily commute, but also considers those folks that are only going a short distance. So now it's my honor to introduce a 7th generation Tennessean, a fellow Williamson Countyan, and our 50th governor of the state of Tennessee, the Honorable Governor Bill Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor, for that. I'm excited to be here, honored to be here, but excited to be here for what I believe is one of the most important subjects that our region has to address, gets to address. We get to address this challenge. The reason we get to address this challenge is because of the unique situation we find ourselves in of great prosperity economically in this region, 11th fastest growing major metropolitan area in the country. We have more hotel rooms under construction than any city in America because people want to come here. We have an estimated 100 people a day moving here. We have profound positive movement in so many ways in our community, and that's a really great thing. You know, I ran a business for 25 years, and the goal was to provide more opportunity to people through growth. And we provide more opportunity for folks in our region when we have this kind of growth. But it does, it comes at a risk. And the risk is that if we don't lead in ways that we have a responsibility to lead in, then we risk that continued opportunity. There have been a lot of steps made along the way in the past few years to stay alongside of our growth and to keep up with it, but those efforts are not keeping up, and we know that. We know that congestion is growing, and you know what? Congestion is problematic for people driving to and from work, but congestion is also a great economic puts a great economic chokehold on a lot of businesses. I used to run a company that had 500 vehicles. When they sit in traffic, when you have 500 vehicles around the region, potentially sitting in traffic for 10, 20, 30 an hour more than they should be, and you start multiplying those numbers out on businesses, it has profound negative impact on our businesses as well. So I'm excited about this because, you know, I've always believed that with success, new challenges and subsequently new opportunities arise. And we have before us an opportunity to lead, an opportunity to be strategic, an opportunity to think about how it is that we're going to, that the next generation of Middle Tennesseans, and I'm not talking just about Middle Tennessee here either, but that the next generation of Tennesseans has the same opportunity to grow and prosper and provide opportunity that we currently have. We're only going to do that if we will lead on it. And I'm excited about that. And I said it wasn't just Middle Tennessee, it's the entire state. Our infrastructure in this state is integrally connected, as are our communities. You know, it matters to folks in a rural county that we get infrastructure right, and that we have the right kind of funding, and that we can maintain our roads and our bridges and our highways, arteries of prosperity for people living in an agricultural community in Northwest Tennessee or in a suburban area like Williamson County, they're all arteries of prosperity, and they make the economy work all across this state. So I'm excited to just open this strategic plan that we have going forward. I'm excited because I think we have a great opportunity before us. We can lead this country in showing rapidly growing municipalities and regions how it is to develop a strategy that'll work for the long term. I have a couple things that I think are important about this. One is that this group of people is in the room, that this council is a collaborative effort of the region. I've traveled so far to meet with other governors around the challenges that they face in their states around infrastructure. Part of a panel with the National Governors Association to talk about this very subject with governors that are in much bigger states and with much larger cities than we have, to find out just some of the things that they've done. I've talked with our folks in the Department of Transportation specifically. Clay Bright and I sat and I said, we have a responsibility here. We have a responsibility to have a big plan and a big look forward for the long term, for the future. Let's talk about some big things we can do. We've got, through the Improve Act, we've got 1,000 projects that are in the pipeline to be funded through that over the next 15 years or so. But we have to have a much bigger strategy than just funding the maintenance and the keeping up with our bridges and highways. We have to think big, and that's what this is about. But we can't do it independently. No independent agency can do that. It is going to take collaborative work. And here's why. Because we have to have a clear strategy. And it has to have broad public support. And the only way that's going to happen is if all of the region's leaders around this subject come together. And that's what this kickoff is about. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the prospects of where we're going to go. I feel certain that we will develop a strategy that is clear, develop one that does have broad public support, and that we will make sure that the next generation of Tennesseans has the same opportunity that we have to live in one of the most economically prosperous states in the country. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for coming together around this incredibly important subject.
Great honor for us, and we thank Governor Lee and also Mayor Moore for your inspiring remarks and your leadership. Let us once again thank Governor Lee for his time this morning. Like any good transportation thinker, and I think that's what we all want to be, let's keep the show moving along. To take us on a journey through the ever-changing landscape of emerging technologies and innovation, please help me welcome back to Nashville, all the way from Austin, Texas, mobility strategist and entrepreneur, Joseph Kopser. Have a clicker.
So I don't know if you've had a chance to read the bio. By the way, can you hear me in the back? The mic working? I don't know if you saw the bio, but I'm a 20-year Army combat guy, and so you're probably wondering, scratching your head, why is a 20-year Army combat guy here talking this morning about mobility and creative ideas? And when I think it's important, I'm going to pick up the governor's comments and just continue to take them forward, because what I try to do, whether it was in my 20 years in the Army, 5 years teaching at the university level at West Point and the University of Texas, or in my last 6-8 years in business creating a mobility company that later went on to scale and go across the country, but more importantly, brought new and creative ways for people to think about mobility. So I start with her. I start with her because when we start to talk about buses or cars or rideshare or vehicle miles traveled or any of the current metrics, we lose an opportunity. We have to start with her and so many other kids in Middle Tennessee that are facing challenges that many of us, fortunately in this room, will never have to face personally. But let's just take one issue, one creative way of thinking about this issue of mobility and transportation and flip it on its head, because that's what I like to do as an innovator, as an engineer, as an entrepreneur. Don't go at the problem under the current set of metrics, but ask it in a new way. So there's a fabulous study that came out a couple of years back looking at the healthcare costs in the Southeast. And one particular healthcare issue that never gets enough attention, and that is a term called failure to thrive. Those of you in the medical industry would probably know this term, but what it basically means is that this kid is not getting enough nutrition. Now, they're getting enough calories, but it's all the wrong kinds of foods. It's not the fresh foods. It's overly processed, and they're almost starving to death. A typical medical emergency room visit for a kid her age, failure to thrive, is $40,000 that we, the taxpayer, pick up. These are families that are living at and below the poverty line in many cases, and we, the taxpayer, because we are good people, are not going to let her starve, and we pay that $40,000 medical stay. But here's the kicker. When you go further into these studies, they find out that the reality is it's the access to medical coverage and medical appointment follow-up that these families don't have. It's the access to a job that not only pays well with meaningful purpose, but they can get home from in enough time to make a good family dinner. It's the access to actually find the places that sell the food that are not coming from a package that's been on a shelf for months. So if we can frame in a new and creative way this challenge that you all face as a region, we have amazing opportunity. Just like the governor said, there's challenges, but there are whole new ways of measuring this problem. And if we look at the amount of money you're already spending in your medical industry and taxpayer dollars and think, well, what could we do to lift and shift access so that we can now measure the full problem using a whole lot of other data? So it's this idea of access that I hope you take away. You're going to talk about vehicle miles traveled. You're going to talk about cars. You're going to talk about bus capacity. I got it. But always ask the question, what is this project giving us access to? Because as the governor explained, not enough people are talking about the economic impact of poor mobility access. Now, whether it's a county or a small town or a growing city, if employers are not only choked off from foot traffic coming in the door, if employers are choked off from access to good labor who can get there reliably on time, or access to a supply chain that's uninhibited by traffic and congestion, if we have all those things working in the right direction, the good news is all this stuff pays for itself. All these plans that you have down, they pay for themselves because of a richer economic development opportunity across the whole region. And folks, we have got to work together. You know, I am from Austin, Texas. And in Austin, Texas, we think we're the cool city. You all have a fantastic track record as a region for being a cool city as well. But let me just tell you, as a ghost of Christmas past, of what we've screwed up in that region, it is now choking off opportunity. Companies are deciding not to move, in some cases, to Central Texas or over to our sister city, Houston, because they may do great when the chamber comes. On a Chamber of Commerce Day, they're hosting them. They got everybody. It's gorgeous and it's sunny. But man, when they leave and they come back with their families to do a family reconnaissance and they're stuck in traffic, spouse looks over and says, we're supposed to live in this congestion? See, that's the unhidden cost. That's the hidden cost that you're not measuring if you just go into your creative planning working together and just talk about vehicle miles traveled or bus capacity or whatever. You've got to think about that storefront that no longer has access to customers or employees or the supply chain because your traffic just came to a gridlock. And in Texas, we made many of the wrong decisions, but you still have the chance to make a lot of the right decisions that parts of Texas didn't. And that's what I'm excited about. And the economic factors are there. This is Yahoo Finance recently reported it. Your region is not growing as fast wage-wise as others. And you cannot talk about mobility without talking about the connection between where people live and where they work. If you say transportation, if you say mobility without saying housing in the same sentence, I'm afraid to tell you, you're never going to get out of this quandary. The linkage between housing costs and housing prices with where people work and what connects them between the two and where they play, your live, work, and play. If all of your planning isn't considering all three of those together, you're going to get stuck like so many cities now that have become over-congested. So as you go into this partnership, the strategic launch today, and you're looking out over the next 9 to 12 months, what are you measuring? Push back. As elected leaders, what are we measuring as CEOs and business leaders? What are we measuring as chambers of commerce and economic development specialists? Are we just measuring the throughput of cars? How are we measuring people? Are we considering that little girl in the beginning and her access to quality health care and quality food? Is it growth? Is it housing? Only you can answer that. Remember, I'm the ghost of Christmas past where we screwed it up in Texas. So I'm hoping that the ghost of Christmas future here in the middle Tennessee area, y'all get it right, and it's all about what you measure. Because you can only change what you measure and you know about, because last time I checked, your gut instinct of what used to work and what should be working often doesn't apply region-wide. So I did a nice little triple split here. You recognize the two on the left, that's Atlanta. That's another city, the ghost of Christmas past, that made some really bad decisions about their mobility and housing over the last 50 years. And on the right, so the question is, are y'all going to look more like that on the left, or are you going to continue to make better decisions? I mean, that's Atlanta today. I don't know who necessarily wants to live in that kind of an environment, but if you only focus on cars and vehicle mile traveled, for instance, you get that. This is something else I like to remind folks, that better mobility will lead to upward mobility. I can't tell you how many times as a transportation expert over the last 8 years I've read case studies and then gone into the footnotes and realized, wait a minute, what they're not telling the story is the reason why that person lost their job or were fired from that job because it was the third time they showed up late. It's not motivation. It's the fact that they gave up on waiting on the bus. They borrowed a friend's car. The car broke down. They didn't get there. It's all connected. It's all connected together. So I really don't think that you all have a choice. You have to consider what is in the world of the possible. And the neat thing is that the trends are going your way. And the reason why I mean the trends are going your way is, so it was all about motors and motor vehicles back in the day. And then as we got further along the timeline, we get into the idea of transportation demand management. MPOs like yourself started to think about regional plans, but it was still very centric on a couple measurements like cars or vehicle miles traveled. But when we got into the era of ride sharing and sharing economy and Uber and Lyft, and that's when Mercedes came and bought my company, because they're like, we're a car company. What in the hell is going on in mobility and transportation? Why are people getting in the back seat of a total stranger and driving off? And I said, well, that's actually a taxi by a different form. And so what you have now in this rise of disruption, and the latest version of disruption are scooters. I think y'all have got about 1,000 here in Nashville. There are 15,000 permits in Austin. 15,000. And it's now no longer related to just scooters. Now it's moving into the little mopeds. I mean, it's a disruption that city business leaders have got to figure out what right looks like. So here's something else that's a challenge that you have to keep in mind. We can't keep using the old formulas. That little red line, that's the gap that we have between the highway fund that's paid for by the gas tax that hasn't been changed since '93. And so if you're going back to the well again, making another plan that relies on highway fund money, that number is going in the wrong direction. The other thing to consider is, how long have we had bad traffic? 1978, going back to the 50s, who knows? My favorite part to say is that we got a whole lot of photos that show it's always been bad. Traffic has always been bad, but we have always, unfortunately, taken Band-Aid approaches and said, well, let's just fix this intersection, or let's just fix that interchange. And this Band-Aid approach is what a lot of cities do. I'm not just picking on Middle Tennessee. It's what everybody does. in the past. Until we start to think holistically now. Wait a minute, if we connect housing and we think about how we can allow people to live more densely, the reason why the 6th generation folks that live here say this was much better back in the day is because they lived about a mile from where they worked. We don't do that anymore, and since we don't do that anymore, we need to think differently, think creatively. So, I love this photo because this is what we're all up against. It's called physics. It's called math. If everybody in the region believes, and many do, you might be in this room, and I got it. My wife would be in this category, that everybody believes they should have their own vehicle, free to drive wherever they want, and damn it, if they're not parking next to the building, they're pissed. Okay, that's my wife. I invented a mobility company, and she still loves to drive her car and park right next to the building. But the physics is working against you. 2 million people. When you look at the projections by 2040, you're projected to outpace as a region most of the other cities right now that are struggling and making these bad decisions. But the good thing about this is, if you look just in the middle, what a tiny little footprint 40 people make. And then maybe a slightly larger footprint when they're using bikes, a little bit larger footprint when they're in a bus. But what I want to make sure we're doing is thinking about all of this in terms of access. Now, see, you don't know necessarily where that photo was taken. Was that taken in a downtown corridor? Was that in a suburban area? Was that an ex-urban area? The good news is you all get to choose. Where do you put the priorities? Is it on walking and people? I mean, shutting down roads when there's a lot of folks like on Broadway? I was actually very surprised. This is a distinction between Austin, 6th Street, and Broadway, Nashville. Austin and 6th Street, at about 8 or 9, the police just shut the whole place down. There's not a car for 3 blocks. So if you want to get a lift to go home, that's great. Don't drink and drive, but you have to walk a couple blocks. I was surprised still to see cars going right down the middle of Broadway close to so many people. But it goes back to your priorities. And what are you measuring? So it's access, it's access, it's access. But in addition to that, let me just take another moment to just take a big dynamite stick, go boom, and blow up what you traditionally think about public or private. I love this photo because it has no nomenclature other than brand names, but it has no labeling on the side of those vehicles. So I ask you, is that a taxi up in the upper right-hand corner? Is that an Uber or Lyft? Is that a person participating in Hitch, a Middle Tennessee innovation, encouraging people to think differently about their motivation? That bus, is that a bus subsidized by taxpayer dollars, or is that a bus now hired and chartered by a large employer who cannot physically get enough people to work on time, and a corporate bus? A lot of cities are doing this. Between San Antonio and Austin, several companies have their own bus line just moving people back and forth. Why? Because they know the most unproductive time of their workforce is when they're behind the wheel. And so employers are figuring out, well, let's just provide them the mobility. And then down the right-hand corner, now we're talking about microtransit. Is that a vehicle being used as part of a corporate plan? Or is that part of a neighborhood extension of micromobility as part of a public transportation agency? Here's what I'm here to tell you. It doesn't matter. Think creatively and just wipe all the slates clean as you go into this planning process and say, no, wait a minute. Quit worrying about this. Oh, we got public transportation here. We got private transportation there. This is a corporate deal. You're going to have, over your 14 counties, as this growth continues, lots of different entities, public and private, that pop up. What I encourage you to do, for instance, is think about a common fare system. A predecessor city of San Francisco, that's also restrained by geography in similar ways that you all are, they have grown up over the years creating transit agencies. They have 27 now. 27 agencies under the umbrella of the MTC, and they're not on a common payment system. They're not where they need to be. That's what we need to figure out. Here's another neat opportunity you all have. You represent all the different types of the built environment. Every one of these parts of the built environment have its own unique challenge, like constrained roadways. But the other great thing is you have all kinds of ability to connect them. And there's folks that are figured out. Is it going to be wheeled? Is it going to be rail? Is it going to be rubber wheels or rubber tires, or steel wheels or steel tires? There's pros and cons to all of them. There is no right answer. It only goes back to how you decide to measure this in the beginning. What is important to you in terms of access and how you get it? This is another great example of a public-private partnership in Arlington, Texas. A technology like VIA in a mid-sized passenger van on a dynamic basis, meaning there's no schedule, it goes out into the neighborhoods to grab people who want to go back to the major trunk lines to drive people in to the larger Dallas-Fort Worth area. In other words, you don't have to run a 40-passenger bus out into the suburbs. You run that vehicle not on a schedule, but on demand. It's like a group Uber or a group Lyft. It's, again, another example of thinking creatively, working together, lots of different public-private partnerships. This is another example, taking the last mile, first mile solution, which is great. Look, I know I can take this VIA, I can get to the trunk line, but when I'm downtown, how do I get to that final point? Well, now, if we're recognizing that foot traffic matters to your store and a business district wants to help subsidize that last little bit to get your feet walking through their doorway, we have a great opportunity. New York City's handling this in a slightly different way. They're starting congestion pricing. You want to go downtown into our business district during these hours? Pay. Suddenly, employers are like, rather than make 8 trips into downtown Manhattan, why don't we do 1 a day? Just means the supply chain changes a little bit. Doesn't mean they're any less effective. It just means they're thinking differently about it because incentives matter because of the way they're measuring success in New York. This is another one. These are autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles, we have no idea how they're going to impact the workforce, traffic. You know, there's some that joke that even if we have all autonomous vehicles, if everybody's got their own individual, singularly occupied autonomous vehicle, all we've done is create a lot of traffic with a lot of people watching movies. But if we think about how these can be networked with existing trunk lines of other larger capacity, because remember the physics? Those 40 cars versus the 40 people versus the bus and all the different ways to move them? You can only squeeze so many people because you're constrained by geography on some of these roads, but if you have them riding together through whatever partnership, you get them. Again, we've got to blur the lines and quit worrying as much about public or private, because I'll say as a business owner, I should have taken a lot more of my marketing dollars, and rather than just blast out to people what we were having as an event-wise to get them through the door, I should have just subsidized rides at a lower cost of acquisition per customer and literally picked them up and just taken them to our event. That is what I mean by thinking outside of the normal confines of this discussion and blurring these lines. I mean, when you talk about how you're going to do this, it's got to be regional. It's got to lead with indicators that matter to you all, and I'm quite sure it's people, like that little girl in the beginning. It's easy to translate care for her into an economic incentive when you look at, for instance, as I described, the healthcare costs. There's all different ways you can do it. But in order to work together, you need to agree on a certain set of metrics of how you're going to be measuring it. But the good news is it works. You still, as a region, don't have what we suffer from in Austin and Dallas and Houston, which is a 10 a.m. Saturday traffic jam. Are you kidding me? I'll be sitting in traffic on a 10 a.m. on Saturday going, where the hell are all these people going? Now, the problem is where I live, there's only one trunk line that only runs Monday through Friday. So I am often stuck in that, either in my vehicle or if I'm going downtown for an event, in a ride share or riding with others. But it's when we figure out how to collapse all 4 of these levels, from economic development to transit leaders to local leaders, when you bring it all together, it manifests in programs like this. This is one of my favorite examples. This is out in California. So over here on the very right-hand side, that big orange line that runs along the interstate, there's a BART station, the Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's a very expensive rail system that was built years ago. But this little community here, Emeryville, wasn't going to be able to build its own rail line and certainly didn't have enough funds to be able to bring a bus service there until they got together with the economic leaders of the community and said, all right, we're going to work together on this. We're going to pitch in a certain amount of money, and we're going to create a line that runs frequently. So people now know with great confidence they can get off on that BART station, take that shuttle through that quaint little community, and the best part is they are walking through those storefronts. They are seeing so much foot traffic that it is the business leaders that are investing more in that little transit line. And I say transit, it's a totally private system, but it is a transit system paid for by the employers because they want the foot traffic, and it's much easier for their employees, especially in the BART district, to be able to get home on that BART and not have to necessarily drive or be worried about driving. So you're changing fast. I don't even have to tell you that, but here's what I do want to tell you. Well, this shameless plug for my book, by the way. Shameless plug for my book. This is what I do. I like looking at problems not by sitting there and just taking the old metrics and rewriting the equations and seeing if it adds up. What I've learned in my 20 years in the Army and in academia and in business is it's about the incentives and how you line them all up. You first start with your priorities, and then you work back from what the vision is for the future. If you just look at where you are in the present and say, how can I fix this problem I'm in this little tiny box, you are going to simply go from one bad box over into another bad box. But instead, you've got to figure out where you want to be with the end of this. And there's just a couple of trends here at the very end of this because they're telling me to wrap up, which is that change is not happening slowly, okay? My grandparents who lived into their 90s were World War II, Depression era, and all the stories they told me were about change, but it was a very slow change. The forces that are at play right now are moving against you as a community, and really it's an opportunity, so fast that we cannot even allow old planning cycle timelines to be the norm. So we have a 5-year plan, we have a 10-year plan. Folks, the disruption that's occurring is happening so fast that I love showing this chart from our book, because this is the way it used to be. In the olden days, it'd be like 100 years between the printing press and the microscope. 100 years. But now on the right side of this chart, once we got into the 2000s, from smartphones to quantum computing, just the simple fact that you have in your hand right now a phone with more computer power than Apollo 11 should be an indicator that things are changing. But the cool thing is with this phone, I now have GPS. And with 5G coming online, I have the ability to do a lot more. Imagine this. You could put somebody, and this is what I mean by thinking outside the box, you could put somebody in a car, pick them up from their house, take them to your place of business or your city hall meeting or your town hall board meeting and have them watch a little video on the way, paid for by the whomever group, trying to advertise whatever. They get a customer, you get a citizen at your town hall meeting, you get more foot traffic in your store, whatever it is, all of that is being enabled by all these technologies. So when I mean we've got to work together, there's so many different ways to attack this if we're creative. And I love showing some current trends that's happening faster than we can deal with it. Robotics, autonomous delivery vehicles, like several U.S. cities now have these little tiny robots, these Domino pizza looking delivery folks that just autonomously take themselves down your sidewalks. They stop in front of a building, and if they can't get into that building, they text you. Your delivery is out front waiting for you. What is that going to do to the intersection between sidewalks and people and bikes and lanes? Think about what delivery trucks alone do to the movement of people and goods when they just stop or double or triple park to run in for a minute and do what they've got to do. All of this has got to be measured, and I love this picture in the upper right-hand corner. That's an Amazon lockbox, if you haven't seen one of these. Maybe some of you that have large towers, either residential or commercial, know what's happening, which is people aren't delivering packages anymore to their home because there's not a safe way to allow that package to sit out front of their apartment, so they deliver them to work. Well, in a large, tall building, they have no place for all these packages. People are ordering everything from basketballs to beer to you name it. It's coming to their door at their office, and sometimes the delivery people won't let it go up to their actual desk. So now they've taken, storage rooms and they're packing them to the ceiling with packages. All of this is about access. All of this is about commerce and the movement of people and goods for a purpose. In that upper left-hand corner, I hope that's not your mall. But that empty place, that's someone's mall. Now the good news is malls are having a renaissance. Some malls are coming back to life. People really do miss the human connection, but it's a different kind of connection. And then the other thing that people are missing is the opportunity to get the education they need. So in some cities, in some malls, they're being taken over by community colleges. That is what I'm trying to get at here with this discussion. If you only limit your plan to just mobility, unfortunately, you'll miss an opportunity. If you look at it about access, about the entire community, the entire region, you'll get at it. And food delivery services, people delivery services, all these mobile apps, I mean, I'm guilty. I built one of them. That's the one that we sold to Mercedes. So I'm a part of the problem as much as I am a part of the solution. And then here's the other neat thing you get to look at. You know, you've got Nissan right here in your backyard. You have all kinds of different opportunities with the future of mobility as being not just a participant, but also being a leader in it. This notion of the shared, electric, connected, autonomous vehicle, it's already here. People are like, oh, there won't be self-driving cars for 15 years. Folks, this first time we ever put cruise control in a car 30 years ago, we began this long march towards automation. The difference is now, over the next couple of years, Elon Musk and those Teslas, those of you that don't own a Tesla, they can download a new software to the inner workings of your car, and it can now do new things. You can buy a Tesla that in a month or two, you can download a software that your car will come get you from the garage. Okay? So this is all coming, and hopefully rather than like stand back and react and push back, we learn how to embrace all these opportunities, because when we're talking about shared mobility, am I going to own a car anymore? Or am I going to have a fleet of cars? If I own a car dealership, am I looking at this as an opportunity to turn my dealership into like a holding zone for all these shared electric autonomous cars that after they're done taking people home from wherever they are and out to the surrounding counties after work, they've got to have some place to go? Where are they going to go? We don't want them just driving around the streets empty. We've got to have a place for them. So let's take it back to where we started. She really doesn't give a flying hoot about shared, electric, connected, autonomous. She's not really into the innovation that's occurring faster than at any point in human history. She's really not caring about all the discussions and plans we're making. She is caring about whether or not she is going to get home from work on time to see her kids before they go to bed. That's what she cares about. She wants to see her kids in the light of day. She wants to read them a story, feed them a good meal, and send them to bed. That is what she cares about. Which is why I say, going back to the beginning, why is a 20-year Army combat guy talking about mobility and transportation? Because for me, it's all about systems and allowing people to be the best that they can be. And if we can figure out how to get it right, we can avoid scenes like this. Because this kid, he's going to get there. He's going to get from his home to that activity, that school play, that afternoon sports activity. He's going to get there one way or another. The question is, what are you as a community doing to enable that? And if we're figuring out how to make this a question of access to jobs, access to education, access to health care, access to good food, if we put it in those terms, this is really an easy discussion. And people will see big numbers, but as the governor said, you can either pay it in a tax or a fee bait. You can distribute the money however you want in terms of your accounting, but business will always pay in the end, either directly through lost productivity by their employees, or business will pay for it in the end when their taxes go up because people are having expensive $40,000 visits for failure to thrive and hunger rather than solving that problem with better access. And this is what we don't want. We don't want the economic engine of this region to shut down because we couldn't figure out how to get the engine of access up and moving. These folks are going to come. They're going to disrupt what we're doing. So my name is Joseph Kopser. I'm going to be here all morning during the partner launch. I hope to talk to you as many as I can. And again, this wasn't a scare thing. I can see the look in the faces. People are like, oh my goodness. No, this is a great opportunity to solve these problems if we think creatively and work together on them. Thank you very much.
Joseph Kopser, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. From his first remark, I was thinking, those of us who have been in traffic in Nashville in the last 20 years, we feel like we've been in combat too. Good remarks and good things for us to think about. Really, really helpful stuff. We have a lot of smart people here this morning who've been doing a lot of good thinking about many of the issues we face. We have a couple of panels, and I'm going to invite our first panel to come to the stage right now. Let me call your names. If you would come up and take a seat in order here across the stage and get your mics on, we'll get started. First up is David Strauss. David is the Executive Director of the Association for Commuter Transportation and has traveled here from Boston to be with us today. David Strauss. No, right here. That'll work great. Aaron Hafkinshield. Boy, I hope I got that right. Aaron is the Executive Director of Mobility for Vanderbilt University. Aaron? Second seat. Luis Parodi is the Vice Chair of the Nashville Area Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and a member of the board for Williamson Incorporated. Luis? Josh Westerhold is a Senior Manager of the Future Lab for Nissan Alliance Mobility Services. Josh? One more chair. Mark Cleveland is a local entrepreneur, co-founder of Hitch Rewards, the free app that incentivizes ride sharing across Middle Tennessee and beyond. Mark? Good morning, panel. If you would each put your microphones on, and that little square thing at the bottom of the wire there, if the Shure is facing you, if you turn the switch on top to the left, your mic would be on. We would love to achieve on for everybody. You got us in the audio booth? Let's give it a try. I want to thank y'all for being here today. To get us started, I'd just like to go down the line here, starting with David, and give each of you a chance to tell us what resonated the most from what you heard Joseph talking about. We'll start with David Strauss. David?
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. It was fabulous to hear Joseph's presentation. For me, that key is access. It is actually going beyond access, but it's looking at making sure that that access is efficient and that it is affordable for all commuters that are out there and for all individuals that are out there. And the other key for me was really about the importance of collaboration and making sure that as regions move forward, we're thinking about solving these challenges together and starting to put kind of the historic egos to the side and making sure that we're developing solutions that are empowering all the organizations, all the entities that are focused on these challenges, and ensuring that the solutions that are being developed are enabled to rise up to the top and to be implemented. So for me, it was that access and collaboration piece.
All right, David. Aaron?
I really love that he started with people. I was trying to look up what he was going to talk about last night, so I watched a few of his TED Talks, and that was definitely a new approach, starting from people. And one of my former colleagues, Laura Moore, is at the Opportunity Project at Harvard, and some of the new data that is coming out of that is that, first of all, long commutes is the single largest predictor that you won't be able to escape poverty. And second of all, if you live in a walkable neighborhood where you have walkable access to the things that you need, that is the biggest predictor that you will be able to escape poverty. So transportation is hugely relevant to these equity conversations. And then secondly, I have a 3.5-year-old that looks a lot like that first little girl that was on the screen. And I come home to see her and my 9-month-old every night, and I want them to be able to walk to school and cross the street safely and not have to lecture them about how to be safe on the sidewalks. And so I think it really is about designing a place for the city that we want.
All right, thank you. Luis?
So something that I really enjoyed on the conversation was the fact that technology is going to change the way that we're living in the city. Basically, every day there is a new development, a new thing coming out that we, as members of the community, we have to look at and make sure that everyone is leveraging those new access, new opportunities, new options. One of the things that, for example, we're seeing a lot with the local large companies in the city is that they have so many options for not only the large companies, but also small business owners. And those are the commercial clients that I work with. Those are the clients that I'm working on a daily basis, trying to find solutions to those big challenges. They want to grow, they want to expand, they want to leverage the economic development of this city, but they are facing those challenges on how to bring, first of all, their clients to their places, and also how to bring more employees to expand their business. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and look forward to continue this conversation.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I think what caught me was sort of the picture towards the end of the woman that Joseph mentioned, that she's not thinking about all of the sort of metrics that we're thinking about. She's also not thinking about kind of the bright, shiny objects of a kick scooter or a connected and autonomous vehicle. She's thinking about how well the system works. So our path as sort of a company has to recognize that it's not about just making great products that help you sort of move people. It's understanding our role in the system and not to be threatened by that, but to see that as an opportunity to sort of help systems work better fundamentally, make them more efficient, make them safer, and make them sort of fit into kind of the regional needs of all of the cities that we work in sort of across the United States as well as the rest of the world. So I think it's tempting as a car company to be sitting up here to sort of see this as a threat. I think it's important for us to also recognize this as a really exciting time, the sort of transformation of our systems of transportation.
All right, thank you. Mark?
Well, I appreciate what you just said. It's not something to be seen as a threat, but something to be seen as an opportunity, and I took that away from Joseph's remarks. Cumberland Region Transit, Cumberland Region Tomorrow event a few years ago, Joseph spoke and really inspired me to go all in on the technology solve. And what I heard him talk about that wasn't a reflection of what has already been said, but is a little different twist, is that incentives matter. And we really have to provide whatever it is that we're measuring, we've got to provide the tool sets for that to be measured. We've got to measure different things than we have been in the past. And I like that he said start with her. I just want to remind you, a child born today, your grandchild born today will be 30 years old in 2050. They'll still be alive in 2100, God willing, and they're going to look back at the decisions that we made today and ask us questions about why we didn't act on being carbon neutral and being more responsible with our infrastructure. And I think it's really important that, Joseph inspired me years ago to go all in. I hope he inspired you today to go all in.
Very good. Let's go back to each of our panelists now with some specifics. Not many college campuses were originally designed for vehicles, if you stop back and think about your own experience. Aaron, I know you and your folks at Vanderbilt are making progress toward reducing the number of single-occupant cars, controlling the traffic congestion on the campus. Talk a little about your efforts there and how they might have implications for our region-wide problems.
Yes, so as a lot of you in the room know, Vanderbilt and the Medical Center combined is the largest private employer in the entire Middle Tennessee region. We have about 12,000 commuters that come to our campus every day and another 25,000 who come to the Medical Center every day. Right over there in Little Midtown, lots of commuters coming back and forth. So our new program, Move VU, is a TDM program to shift our mode share from a 76.5% drive-alone rate to a 55% drive-alone rate in 2025. I keep having to remind myself that that's only 5 years away. And we're really doing this. We've got two main strategies. One is really investing in our infrastructure, both improving our pedestrian pathways. Half of our campus is very walkable, half of it is very drivable, and we want to make the entire campus more walkable. But we're also investing in really state-of-the-art technology and sensors so that we can track our progress over time. We're installing some of the first array of things sensors in the Southeast, actually only the second campus to do so after the University of Michigan, as well as a partnership with TDOT and Metro to install blue toad sensors. The second thing, which Mark talked about, is really putting our incentives in place, policies and programs that will incentivize sustainable commute mode shares. We're changing how we charge for parking from an annual pass to a daily pass. We are investing in a new commute app that will allow people to see their options, but also track their travel, their commutes to and from campus over the month. And then we are also putting our money where our mouth is, and we are going to pay people 50 cents a day for if they walk, bike, or take transit. So really sort of changing the incentives to put sustainable commute options on an equal playing field. And so I think that as we think about how this impact how other regional employers can think about this, I'd sort of put two things on the table. First of all, rethink free parking. And second of all, pay for your employees' transit passes. There are only about 15 major employers in Middle Tennessee that are part of the MTA and RTA Easy Ride program, and we really need to see that to change. That is the quickest and fastest thing that we can do as a region to really make change. The Seattle region, employers pay $100 million every year for transit passes. That's more than our current annual budget for transit. So we can have a really big impact. If regional employers paid for 2,500 annual transit passes, we could invest in longer service hours next year. That's a huge impact. And the second thing is please rethink about free parking. Free parking is the biggest driver of commute trips. Think about the last time you had to do a short trip. If you were debating between driving and walking, you probably thought about whether there was going to be free and available parking. And if there was, you probably drove. So I know you're saying, as an employer, I'm not going to take away my employees' free parking because then they're going to go to my competitor. Well, we at Vanderbilt are going to go first. We ask people to pay for their parking, and we're starting to rethink the subsidies that we put in that program. So please rethink about that.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Josh next to think a little bit about the direction of the future of mobility. We heard Joseph talk about the intersection between public and private. How do the actions of government, things like street design, investments in technology infrastructure, how does public and private intersect with planning to contribute to change or inhibit change?
Yeah, I wish that, in some ways, I wish that we could pull back up Joseph's timeline that he showed in terms of the change of technology that's happening. I think you could overlay on top of that similar sort of timeline in terms of transportation technology and how we've moved, sort of very slowly in terms of us walking around and taking boats to taking horses, and then all of a sudden sort of exploded during the mechanical age to sort of taking steam engines and cars, and then all of a sudden we're in sort of the next wave of digital change and how people are moving, empowered by kind of the internet as well as the smartphone. At the same time, you could do another layer on top of that timeline, and that starts to look at how infrastructure and sort of the urban planning kind of regimes have changed to go alongside that. We fundamentally have to build our infrastructure in a way that both matches the technology of the day, but also enables new sort of progress towards the things that we want. It used to be that our streets were covered in sort of horse excrement when we started moving around by horses, and then that went away within about 10 years because we started to prioritize the car. And then the car started to dominate for 80 to 100 years, dominated our street, and now all of a sudden what we're seeing is users and customers are telling us that they would rather move in other ways, whether that's for a short trip on a scooter or sort of a trip where they might be drinking or heading to the airport and taking a ride hail or some other form of public transit or sort of public-private transit. We have to think about how we design, and I think what's so great about what Vanderbilt is doing is thinking about the sort of the two faces of that, right? Sort of the infrastructure and the incentives, which Mark obviously is very keen on. I think we have to think that in the future, the systems that we design, the streets that we design will enable the transportation. And then, in the state of Tennessee, for example, we do not allow for buses to have designated lanes. The result of that is we've sort of given priority to the car. The result is that you're not going to have a ton of sort of transformation in the way we think about moving until you think about how we prioritize, to use sort of Joseph, another one of Joseph's slide, how we prioritize access, how we prioritize transportation. So as a car company, as we think about a connected and autonomous, a shared and electric vehicle of the future, all of that implicates both incentives as well as design. What does our infrastructure look like for charging vehicles, for prioritizing autonomous vehicles in a lane, for giving the opportunity sort of to connect to digital infrastructure like streetlights and sort of digital layers of infrastructure that the city would have. And so it is a combination of public-private partnership. It is a sort of, there's always a question of who goes first and whether that's the public side or sort of the private side sort of pushing forward. But I think we recognize, again, our place in a system that involves a lot of different types of mobility, and we understand that the regulation, policy, design, and planning that will lead that way will also sort of dictate how we kind of respond to it.
Very good. We have all been in meetings where someone said, we need to think outside the box. True? Mark Cleveland is somebody who actually does that and has done that. Mark, tell us about Hitch for folks who don't know all about it.
Wow, there's a pitch. First of all, I want to thank all y'all, as we say here, for being a part of the Hitch experiment. We came to market with a significant amount of support from Nissan and launched in early January of last year. And we were actually, my partner Robert Hartline and I were working this project since 2015. So it takes perseverance and resilience. Then it also takes people who are embracing new ideas. It can't just be your idea. Actually, this isn't my idea. This is really an expression of everything we already know. Raise your hand if you own a car. That's a big market. You know, raise your hand if you get paid to go to work. Now, what happens if you stop getting paid to go to work? Are you going to go to work? Raise your hand if you're going to keep going to work. Yeah, it's all about passion. I'm keeping on. Thanks, Kevin, my partner, saying, yeah, I'll do it. I think it's really important that we focus on incentives. There's absolutely no such thing as success in business without paying somebody to do what you want them to do, period. End of story. You know, Fitbit was just, Fitbit, Google circling around buying Fitbit, you know, it's $1.5 billion worth of value. So a lot of value being created in the digital space these days, whether it's mobility or any other form of conversation. Tesla is a smartphone with wheels on it. We all have the solution in our pockets right now. I don't think we're all big enough to invest in our own app development like Vanderbilt has done, but I have 11 million miles and 250,000 transactions, and thanks to our sponsors in Nashville, we've been able to run $250,000 worth of cash rewards through to pay Nashville commuters to make smarter mobility decisions. And as a result of that, we have the data. So what Joseph was saying is we need to measure things differently. Most of the communities that we interface with, including Seattle and San Francisco and Denver, are looking at Nashville as a thought leader at this moment based on the fact that we have a functioning, scaled incentive plan that works on any form of mass transit. And starting 2 weeks from now, it'll also zero your carbon footprint. When you all drove here today in your single occupancy vehicle, and 5% of us, including Ken, the mayor of Franklin, shared a ride to get here, we all had a carbon impact. We all have an opportunity in 2 weeks to start measuring our walking, our biking, and our drive-alone vehicle trips. And you can learn a lot from the data. We're just a data-starved community. And what we need is we need to put that tiny little incentive. I mean, we're talking $10 a month is about the average incentive that someone hitching earns. And it changes their behavior. And the first behavior is they voluntarily contribute and participate in a system. And the system is cars, or the system is biking, or the system is mass transit, or the system that they have available to them is running on time. I think we have a great transit system. And by the time you get done adding it all up, we just don't know who's where or how they're using it. So Hitch is an activity-based cost, which is the moment that you decide to go somewhere, measured every single time you do it with an activity-based reward. And our customers decide how much they're going to reward you for parking over here, or for driving in this particular corridor, or for not driving in that corridor. And I want to caution us about one thing that I heard earlier. I think it's important to recognize that congestion pricing is coming. It's coming to the city near you. I don't know whether that's a good idea or not, but I think a better idea is a reward zone. So if you share rides to downtown Nashville instead of getting penalized for $6. You instead, if you share a ride, you get rewarded. And I think we need to be thinking about reward theory, because that's what motivates all forms of business growth. That is what the economic engine of Tennessee is about in one form or another. And I think reward theory matters. So that's what we built. We built Hitch Rewards in order to get people to make smarter mobility decisions.
Thank you, Mark. Luis, you are well positioned to look at how transportation affects business and also how it affects new Tennesseans. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So 1 out of 6 Nashvillians were born outside of the U.S., one of those, obviously. There's more than 120 Latinos living in Middle Tennessee. In the state of Tennessee, the number obviously is different, but we're seeing a lot of multinational companies bringing a lot of top talent. We're seeing a lot of great organizations like Nissan and Vanderbilt bringing a lot of great people to the city that is bringing a lot of fantastic economic impact to the city. And as a banker, I'm a commercial banker, and I've been a banker for many years. I work with a lot of business owners, and I try, as a trusted advisor, try to understand their opportunities, but also their challenges to grow. Banks, we love to lend money so they can continue to grow, but we want to make sure that they can also pay us back. So when I'm talking with these business owners, especially in the downtown area of Nashville, I used to work just 2 blocks from Bridgestone Arena. A lot of these business owners, they want to continue to grow. They want to continue to hire. They want to continue to succeed. But their biggest obstacle is obviously bringing and retaining top talent. Bringing and retaining top talent, especially in this area of the city, is difficult because no one wants to come to work in downtown because they don't want to pay $20 or $30 per day in parking. So that's why technology is very important, ride sharing, Hitch, and other options for them to come to work. And then clients, they want to come to downtown and they want to do, use the services. We see on the news all the time about hotels, that the fact that hotels, they need to close many floors because they don't have enough people, staff, to fill those places. The restaurants that where you might get 1 or 2 hours delay for your food to order because a lot of the people working behind the scenes, it's challenging for them. So business owners are finding that transportation is becoming a very important situation for them to continue to grow. I'm also on the board of Williamson Inc., the wealthiest county in the state of Tennessee. I live there. I've been living there for the last 10 years. Great location. And we recently had a business expo at the factory. And I was working in Green Hills. It took me almost 2 hours to get to that event. And they have to delay a lot of the events because there was a big accident on I-65 on that day. A lot of people were arriving late. I wanted to be there to host and welcome a lot of those business owners. So there are challenges. So I think working as a region will help us to find those solutions. The secret of Nashville is out there. A lot of people want to move, live, and retire in not only Nashville, but in the state of Tennessee. So we have to be very proactive on the solutions that we need to find to continue to grow and thrive in this great state of Tennessee.
Thank you, sir. Infrastructure always comes up, and probably a lot of us have in the back of our minds, well, what are we going to have to change about infrastructure? David works with a lot of governmental folks who are trying to get the most they can get out of existing infrastructure. Tell us about transportation demand management, David, and how that fits into all this.
Excellent. Thank you. So transportation demand management is all about, creating that efficiency within our existing transportation systems. This is about how do we make the best use of everything that we have already put out there for mobility. This is how do we bring in the partners, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, to implement TDM strategies that support the various options that are available to commuters. It's how do we support innovative technologies like Hitch and that Mark has created to really put options in the hands of commuters and to make make it easier for them to choose the programs that they, or the options that they want to get into wherever they're traveling to. TDM, it kind of goes back again to a little bit what Joseph was talking about. It's all about the focus on moving people. When we look at congestion, it is not a car that is late to a kid's soccer game. It is the parent that is late to the kid's soccer game. And we need to change our mindset as communities to think about how are we efficiently moving people from point A to point B and providing the options that are available to them to choose. In some cases, that is a carpool. In some cases, it is transit. There are occasions where it still needs to be, unfortunately, that single occupancy vehicle. But the more people that, the more options that we can put out there that are attractive and affordable and reliable will shift a small amount of commuters over. And when we look at congestion, we do not need to remove every vehicle from the street. There's studies that show, even a 3% shift in mode, you can see a significant impact on congestion and the movement of people throughout an area. So it's really focusing on those small, that small amount of shift that we need, and identifying very specific solutions for very specific commuters. Vanderbilt's taking a great step to really invest in transit benefit programs for their employees. So that is going to have a significant impact on the commuter behavior of those individuals within the campus. The more employers that we can get to think about implementing a very simple change in their payroll to administer a pre-tax benefit to their employees can be a win-win for everyone. The employees will save money on their transit pass purchase. The employer will save money on the amount of taxes they pay. We put more people into public transit, and drivers that don't have the choice to use public transit will be able to move around a bit easier as well. So TDM is all about finding the right options and strategies for the community that you're in. When you're in a rural region, it's looking at carpools and van pools as a solution, and how do you, you're not able to put a full bus out, but you can put on a smaller vehicle that brings 7 or 8 people in at a time, or looking at telecommuting and the option of pulling people out of a vehicle altogether or out of the system altogether and letting them work from home one day a week. So it's really, TDM is all about finding the right solutions and strategies for the challenges that your unique population is facing, whether it's a work site or a neighborhood within a community.
Very good. Have just a minute left, but I want to do a lightning round here. Quick responses to one question, and we'll start at the other end with Mark. We're here today to encourage everybody to work together on a unified plan. What are 1 or 2 issues or concerns or ideas that you think have to be incorporated into this process to ensure that we come out in a successful place? And we'll start the other one with Mark and just come down the line. 1 or 2 things.
Well, I believe that Middle Tennessee has the most significant HOV asset almost anywhere in the United States that is being completely, totally ignored and mismanaged. And I think if we're going to be talking about changing habits, and habits die hard, we're going to need to look at those HOV lanes and start managing them, because they're an incentive. What we've been talking about all day and what we will continue to talk about is what's the incentive and how do you change people's behavior. And if you take away the $1 billion lane and let everybody in there by themselves, and you continue to do that, for whatever the reason is that we've chosen to do that over the last few decades, you've now got the infrastructure of the entire total lane, dedicated lane miles of the entire state, the entire Washington, D.C. metro system is 113 miles of linear dedicated lanes. And Nashville has 110 miles of linear dedicated HOV lanes. So if you want to get higher occupancy, because this is ultimately about asset utilization, if you want to get higher occupancy, you're going to need to start looking at that really carefully. Oh, by the way, the asset exists, doesn't have to be built, and it will actually build credibility in the conversation with leaders about whether or not we should spend billions on some other form of dedicated asset. And I think that's critical. The second thing is that, I heard the governor mention that we have to have a much bigger strategy than just funding infrastructure, and a plan to build over the next 15 years is pretty well understood. We have to have a bigger strategy. What is that strategy? I think the strategy is about engaging the commuter directly. We're evangelists. There's 350,000 cars a day that pile into downtown Nashville and 1 million empty seats. We have the assets. We have very poor asset utilization. We have the technology. We have very poor engagement. We can engage the commuter directly and educate them directly over the next 5 years, over the next 6 years, whatever it takes for us to actually come up with a concrete, superior mass transit solution that people will buy into and tax themselves in order to participate in. We got to have a better strategy, and we have to be focused on engagement. And I heard the governor say that, and I think it's important for us to lead in that direction.
Josh, what are your one or two things?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned in working at a car company is if you keep an extremely tight and deliberate focus on your customer, they'll lead you where you need to go. And so I would encourage everything we do to understand the variety of users of our systems, whether that be someone on a scooter or on a bike or walking or on a bus or driving their car. Understand what their needs are, understand how transportation meets those needs or does not meet those needs. And I also think the important thing when we're thinking about a 25-year plan is the world of transportation is fundamentally changing in a pace that we do not understand. We have really not seen in about 100 years or so. So speed and flexibility of everything we do is quite important. And so the way we think about, again, sort of infrastructure design, incentives, sort of the street, needs to be built in a way that can be flexible and be fast. I think the way we think about partnerships with private entities as well can be an enabler to that, whether it be someone local, kind of like Hitch or Nissan, or bringing in outsiders as well. So I think focus on the user, focus on speed and flexibility, and I think that's going to take us in the right direction.
All right, thank you, Josh. Luis, one or two things?
Technology, I think getting the best practices, not only from the US, but from around the world. You can see what other countries like in Japan and Singapore are doing to mitigate this risk of transportation and mobility, but also communication. I still remember I was kind of involved with the first round of the transportation plan, seeing those banners outside of business owners on Lower Broadway, going against. So making sure the communication is there and having those conversations, not just telling the rest of the region what to do, what to say, but being involved, being able to provide feedback is important. That two-way communication is very important so we can show the win-win that these efforts are going to bring. So we don't waste time and lots of money like we did during the first round. And so hopefully we don't have to go through third round. So during the second round, we can find the solutions needed for us to succeed in this community.
Thank you, Luis. Aaron, your perspective, one or two things.
Okay, I'm going to say 4, but I promise I'll be really, really quick. So the first thing I want to say is that I think we need to acknowledge that infrastructure is really expensive. The sidewalk deficit in Davidson County is going to cost us $10 billion to fix. So that's the same cost as our last transit plan. We are already the proud owners of the Music City Star, which was probably the cheapest commuter rail line to implement in the entire country. So we can check that off the list as something that we've accomplished at a low cost. I think we need to make the conversation about making these investments. We're far behind our peer cities in terms of these infrastructure investments, so there aren't a whole lot of low-cost options left, and we need to make the case for why these investments are really important. Second thing is I think everything needs to be on the table. Let's resist the temptation to let the pendulum swing all the way over from what didn't work last time. I think we learned that after the AMP, and then we've got some lessons from Let's Move Nashville, but let's not swing all the way in the opposite direction. The third thing, and Joseph talked about this a little bit, is that we can't talk about transit without talking about land use. Our demographics are shifting pretty dramatically, and there is a huge demand for more walkable, transit-oriented, affordable communities, and we really need to start building those now. The successful cities of the future will have heard that call and will have answered it, and I really hope that Nashville can start to do that too. And that's also a critical component for being able to create an equitable transportation system. And then finally, if you walk away from this with hearing one thing, let it be that we need a multimodal transportation system. There is not one solution out there that's going to fix all of our problems. It's not autonomous vehicles, it's not scooters, it's not light rail, it's all of those options together. And I know that that makes it more complicated and makes these conversations a little bit more challenging, but our planning process that we're about to kick off has to be dynamic enough and flexible enough so that we can make those decisions based on the corridors. Some corridors are going to need BRT, some corridors might need rail, other corridors are going to need a bus-only lane and wider sidewalks and dedicated micromobility lanes. So all of those options have to be on the table. I promise I was quick.
I think you were quite quick. Yes, David, be quicker. One or two things.
Oh boy. I guess my biggie is to be bold and don't be afraid to really look beyond what is traditionally done, to think about what your aspirations are for the future of this region. And don't be afraid to pull off the Band-Aid approach. It requires a little bit of screaming and pain in the beginning, but I think that's the best approach, is to really just be bold and not be afraid of the challenges in regards to political discussions, what people think as a knee-jerk reaction, but to have confidence in what you're pulling together is really going to be the best solution for that little girl that was up on the screen at the beginning.
Very good. I'm going to ask each of you to slide that switch on your microphone to the off position and put those on your chair. Let's hear it for our first panel today. Okay, who called a break? I didn't call a break. Find your seats, please. We're moving. We're in traffic, folks. We're moving ahead. We want to thank Joseph Kopser and also our panel for all their ideas. I'd like to introduce our second keynote speaker, who hails from the great state of Maryland. He has traveled to be with us to share the perspective on the importance of intergovernmental and cross-sector collaboration as we pursue our own transportation strategy. Paris Glendening served as the 59th governor of the state of Maryland from 1995 to 2003. Today, he is the president of Smart Growth America's Leadership Institute. Please welcome to our stage Governor Glendening.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad
Folks,
I'm
in the booth, we're going to use this one. Put that on there. Watch this. Oh, yeah, that works. But you had that somewhere.
As I watch some people moving here, I'm glad to I'm the second keynote and not the third or fourth keynote person. And so it's my added responsibility to get you all excited about this as well. I will tell you I was in Gallatin yesterday working with Mayor Brown, who is here somewhere as well, and with the municipal leaders. And the thing that is most impressive and important is to realize that that relatively small town of about 40,000, 42,000 people is facing the exact same challenges and problems and trying to sort out the exact same questions that the entire metropolitan and middle Tennessee area is working on as well. And we should keep that in mind because this is both big and very small. And somehow or other we need a system that pulls all of that together. I was asked to speak about the use and impact of smart growth and Smart Growth America, and to focus on transportation on all this as well. Let me just tell you, in terms of drawing together in a relatively few moments, I've been fortunate and I've had three entirely different careers. I taught at the University of Maryland for 27 years, including a focus on federalism and intergovernmental relations and having governments work together, which is part of the challenge here. I also was in elected office for 31 years, including municipal and county level in addition to governor. And now I'm in my 17th year heading a national and international environmental. And so I want to try to bring these different perspectives together, but I also want to tell you that it is interesting because it's part of the whole picture. I should add real quickly as an aside that I was speaking a couple of years ago in Chicago on gender equality, and I was introduced with reference to those background experiences and the years and all that sort of stuff. I thought I gave a reasonably good speech, and so I asked for questions at the end, and the young lady up front hand went up very enthusiastic, and she looked at me and she said, "How old are you anyway?" And she had put all those things together. So please keep in mind, I'm not 107 years old. These are just overlap occupations and professions and all throughout the years. But I will tell you, what we should be thinking about in terms of transportation coordination, which is the key really, is that it's critical not in terms of things we normally discuss for transportation coordination, congestion and construction costs and all that, but it's critical really to having a healthy community, having a prosperous community, having a shared prosperity in the community, one that works for all users. Is this my?
Could be, not mine.
We'll see. All right. Yes. Part of what we do at Smart Growth America is we have a group called Transportation for America, and you can go to our website there and get a lot of the stuff that we're working on as well. But one of the things that we started working on several years ago, a decade and a half ago, with strong support from the Rockefeller Foundation, was about advocating for federal policies that empower local decision makers to pursue solutions that they felt best fit their community and their region. I must tell you, after 15 years trying to work with Congress on this and national administrations of both parties, it has become very, very clear that Congress is not going to do anything innovative or aggressive to really help solve the problems here. The best at the moment we seem to be able to do is to get enough funding to implement really good regional and state and local plans. We have just released a new priorities for the national effort to focus on maintenance, literally fix it first before we go building brand new roads and everything else, focus on what we have, and also for design, for safety over speed. The importance increasingly is about how fast automobiles are moving and everything else, and safety seems to be put to a sidebar. And then how to connect people to jobs, services, and everything that they need. Now, I'm going to add a number of slides as we go through this. Some of them you look at and say, what does that have to do with anything? It's because I want to show you what, in fact, is going on around the country when people think differently. And it's about the goals. We talked yesterday when I was in Gallatin about the role between transportation and successful economic competition in the knowledge-driven job. And one of the things is what happens to millennials and their reactions. My son, Raymond, who's now 40, but when he was about 25, he was in Boise, Idaho, and he gave me a call one day and said, "Dad, have you ever been here?" And I said, at that time I had not. And he said, I want to tell you, this is really a neat town. I could see myself living here. A few years later, we went back to work with Boise on exactly these issues. And one of my comments to him is, you've already won the battle. Because anytime you get young millennials, shiny brights, coming out of college saying, I could see myself living here. And the thing that he talked to me about was how wonderful it was just to be able to walk around downtown. He had a meeting, came out of the meeting, walked down the block, went to lunch, met some other people, going through this type of change. What we really have or need is goals that address the basic needs for getting people where they need to go safely and efficiently, and which also puts a focus on the state and the regional and local shared economy. It's not, by the way, just the big jurisdictions, which a lot of people think it is. We're working with Juneau, Alaska, for example. As I told people yesterday, I don't know why every photo I have of Juneau is raining or snowing, but in any case, they have decided what they need to do, and they're much more isolated than everything, is to bring together a type of comprehensive plan that would address exactly these issues. What we need to do is to recognize that creating a transportation system that truly works requires a significant amount of coordination. Now, you hear this all the time, and that's not anything news. You probably say, why did we bring this guy all the way out here to tell us what we already know? Except that most of the discussion of coordination is about governmental coordination, and it's about governmental coordination between different levels or different regional governments. I've listened with interest about the number of agencies that work on transportation in the San Francisco area, for example. The same is true up in Seattle and numerous places, and Mayor Brown is on 5 different transportation regional coordination groups and all of that sort of stuff. We were talking about them last night. But it's not really that type of coordination is the key. You can coordinate forever among governments if that's all you're going to do. Part of the intergovernmental coordination means more than having the federal, state, local, regional people working together and planning, but to think outside of the box, as people said today, and talk about different ways and what our outcome is. This is one of the things they come up with in Normal, Illinois, and it involved a great deal of public input that said, we want a place downtown. We need placemaking. And so this is a roundabout that is used much of the week, but for significant portions of the week, it becomes a gathering place for people. That was something that came from the community up, not from public agencies down. And I tell people that coordination, dramatic, wonderful technical coordination can also produce horrible results. This is Houston interchange. I have an even better one in Dallas. I don't want to pick on Texas right now, but look at this interchange. Mr. Commissioner, that involves a lot of coordination to put that together like that. I mean, and a lot of money. But you also see what it did. That is downtown Houston. That is all lost opportunity land. If you live over here and you want to go there, what do? You have to get in a 2,000-pound car and travel 2 miles just to go over to something that might be less than a quarter of a mile walkable away. You will be amazed at how many of these, look at the high five interchange, as they call it, in Dallas, and you'll realize even worse than this one. That was well coordinated. Now, it's not just about this type of coordination. I was asked to speak at the Governor of Maryland's, Governor Hogan's Smart Growth sub-cabinet meeting at the Maryland Municipal Association. And I told him, I said, you know, we have the statewide plans and everything, but how well are we implementing them? And then I showed this particular photo here. This is outside of the convention center, directly outside of the convention center where I was speaking. It is about walking down here to my hotel where I was staying. I deliberately choose a hotel so that I can walk to and fro, including because I have a glass of wine with dinner and stuff like that, but that's another point. But when I went back and I asked him, I said, look at this as part of this. Look at what we're seeing. Now, what has happened here? By the way, high curve there, curve here, if you are in a wheelchair or with a stroller or whatever, it's not just a matter of stepping out in the street, it's a matter of life and death. That, as you can tell from the sidewalk, is a relatively recent project. What happens? This is where the coordination just totally falls apart. The people doing it had no idea, meaning the utility companies and the local utility commission had no idea that walkability and transportation was part of their project. All they knew is they had a legal right for right-of-way to build in the right-of-way. I saw that in Gallatin yesterday. I saw that in Nashville. I see that in my hometown of Annapolis, Maryland. And it is the simplest thing. But when I say simple, by the way, a bump out on either side, into the private property or on the other side, if you had to have the pole there, would have resolved that. But no one was coming from this issue. What they were coming from is, we got to deliver electricity. Let's put our poles up where we can put our poles. And so the coordination has got to move far beyond the traditional of what you're thinking. I will tell you a similar kind of a personal story of years ago when I was county executive. I'm driving home, or more properly, the officer was driving home, and I'm looking at this woman walking down the street with 2 young children and a bag of groceries in a mud trailway, and then have them going over a bridge step out into the road. And so the next day I went in and I asked my staff, I said, what the heck's going on here? And they did a good research and gave me a memo, and they said, well, it's a state road. Well, I knew that, and so we contacted the state, and the state says, it's an urban corridor. We don't build sidewalks in urban corridor. Cars go too fast for sidewalks in urban corridor. This woman was not going to change her pattern of going to the grocery store with her 2 little children just because someone said that is an urban corridor. By the way, we wrote the state, and the state refused to change. 2 years later, I got elected. I must say there were some personnel changes shortly thereafter in the highway department because we do care about people. And this is, by the way, an issue all across America. And look at the urban corridors that are either originally federal highways or state highways that were designed mostly to move cars rapidly across state boundaries and everything else. Now they are in the heart of towns and have extraordinary impact, which led us to, in terms of Smart Growth America, one of our other overall approach, and that is when you think about a street or a travel lane of any type, we must focus on what we call complete streets. This is, I deliberately did not name it because it's all across America. Complete streets, about streets being safe, usable, inviting for everyone, for bicycles, for people, as well as for cars. And this is the standard that you see in so many places, in part because we use these old approaches. As I said, sidewalks only go when someone does development in front of their building, and if it turns out that this parcel is developed but that parcel is not, well, there's no sidewalk there. I was in Utah just recently working with the governor there, and we did a walk audit, that they call them. And you'll be amazed if you actually stop and get out of the car and walk someplace and say, if I'm an average person, or give yourself a stroller, or even better, get in a wheelchair and see what happens when you have this type of development. The same type of thing here, and this is all across America. And so what we urge is a complete streets approach that says we're going to start with throughout the old premise that the primary purpose of streets is to move cars fast, rapidly, and reduce congestion, and say that the purpose ought to be for people to prosper, to be healthy, to be successful, to walk, to care for their families. What we urge is a holistic approach that incorporates input, and really incorporates, not just a saying or a line, but input from just about everyone. The question in terms of transportation, it's got to be more than governmental coordination. It is about economic development. It is about housing. It is about workforce and workforce development. It's about social services. It's about environmental quality. And it is about equity in the community. And unless you have the people that are bringing these issues to bear, you're not going to get that type of discussion in the coordination. And it can be done. I mean, there are so many areas that have been working on it all over the country. This is South Bend, Indiana. They took an old industrial area that's starting to come back. They adopted a complete street. You see the mechanisms of it all here. Separate the pedestrians, separate the bicycle, put some landscaping in there to separate them from the cars. By the way, it doesn't protect them, but it gives a sense of security and a feeling of walkability, and put that together. And you may lose a lane. You may have to lose 2 lanes. I was on a drive yesterday, and I asked the person from Gallatin, why do we have these 6 really wide lanes here? And your response was, Mr. Commissioner, I'm sorry, it's a state road, right? Well, if you had seen these lanes and you look at it and all, and then you think of what could be done reducing 1 lane and adding this type of thing, and it is happening all across the country. We recognize that regions increasingly are understanding this as well. But what we really need is to recognize that transportation facilities are not built for transportation. Now that may sound strange. The main purpose of transportation facilities, of roads and highways and all, should not be about roads and highways. It should be about other goals that we're trying to achieve in society. This is a tool. Now, with great deference to those of you who are transportation engineers and sitting in the room and thinking, how much can I build for this amount of dollars and what is the congestion impact and so on? Bless you, you're doing a great job. But that is not the real question. The real question is, what are the goals of our community, of our society, and how can we use this tool, this multi-billion-dollar tool, to achieve the goals that the people really want? And when we talk about that, we see the other experiments going on across the country, and they are working. This one is Older Town in New Jersey, and they've done exactly the same thing. They went back and they retrofitted and made it walkable and said, let's put the focus on people. This one is in Traverse City, Michigan. The same type of thing, an older community that made the decision that we wanted to be a walkable community. Government and coordination of governments really must work well with the business community and community advocates who ultimately will demand accountability for the tax dollars. Now, when I say work well with this, what we really need to do is to urge the community to come together, just like this, but probably much more of a multi-group from other perspective type gathering, to come together, government and other sectors, to say, what are the most important values of a community? What are our values? Not transportation per se, but what are our values? Why are we living here? What are we trying to do individually and collectively as communities? And you see some dramatic changes that will occur. This is Rockville, Maryland, which for the longest time had a focus on some major roads running through their area, and they had these big enclosed malls and things of this type, and they had gatherings that said, this is not the community we want. It took them a decade and a half to make these changes, but they made rather dramatic changes. And so the question becomes, how are these values advanced or hindered by our transportation decisions? It's not only a question of saying, oh, we ought to be doing this. We should remember that most of these values are quantifiable. The great things about departments of transportation is that the areas under their domain, they can quantify very well. They can quantify how many vehicle miles traveled, what the congestion costs are, where the congestion is, how much the construction alternatives cost, and so on. But, and it's not their fault because we haven't asked them to do this, what are our other values? How do we quantify them? And then how do we make transportation decisions? Let me give you one quick example. We've worked with the state of Virginia, a fairly conservative state, a bipartisan state, and they put together a list for a scoring system that considers the standard elements of things like safety and congestion, but they also started looking at economic development as well as land use, what was desired in terms of land use in the local communities, access to jobs, including equity in the access to jobs, and they started weighing them against the costs of the project. If you can see at the top, first couple are the normal things that the Department of Transportation will consider: congestion mitigation, safety, and so on. But then you start talking about accessibility and economic development, environment, and land use. This was approved by the state legislature, advanced by the governor, and again, bipartisan. They then applied it to the standard CIP, the standard construction for the next 20 years budget that every state just about has. As a result of that, they eliminated from that program over $850 million of committed obligation, because when you looked at it, then more than construction costs, but actually what happens and what the communities want, they made no sense. They reprogrammed that $850 million into projects that were also on the long-term list, but now made it because of these change in values. And so what we're asking people to do is not only come together, but realize the values that can be stated can also be measured. Maryland has in many ways developed the same type of scoring system. We're not as formal as Virginia is, but a number of other states are now starting to do the same type of thing. What Virginia looked at as well was the priorities in the communities across the state. Not just the priorities what the state was, but what is this community trying to do? And does that really necessitate a 5 or 6 lane urban highway running through that city, or should it necessitate considerable other changes? Also within the state, the values in Northern Virginia, I can guarantee you, are considerably different than the values in the Southern Virginia or in some of the rural areas. And that's part of where the changes occurred, because it was one scoring system for the entire state. I've worked personally on one of them, the College Park Partnership, College Park, Maryland, that's been in existence now for about 15 years. They brought together the business community, the university, the municipal officials, and the community advocates. And they asked what they're going to do about US 1, which was an old US 1 from Maine to Key West highway running through the city, and running through 6 other cities on that line right into the District of Columbia. When US 1 was scheduled originally, when it was built, it was about moving people all across the country. In recent years, it's about how fast can we move commuters in and out of the District of Columbia. And the impact was devastating for these 6 communities. Coming together, working from other non-transportation people up, they put together entirely new plans. And I urge you to go to College Park or the whole corridor at some point and see what has changed. In fact, recently, a group of elected officials, business leaders, and community advocates came from Sacramento, California, to College Park area to see this new corridor development and what has happened there. The lanes have not been widened as was planned. The lanes were narrowed and some lanes taken away. Sidewalks were added. Landscape was added. Students tend to run across streets all the time. So in the middle of the streets now, there's this nice middle section with a brass barrier that people can run across. The fatality rate has declined dramatically. A last goal that I'd really emphasize that we must include in our equation is equity. Equity is destroying this country. Too many people are being left behind or slowly declining in real value. And what it has to become is a major question in our decision making. And one of the biggest decision makers is about the transportation budget. And so the question then becomes, for example, where do you build transit or other investments? And what happens in terms of equity when you do so? Just as a quick example, if you look at just about any piece of property, and whether it's because of transportation or other investments, you decide to make a major revitalization, wonderful what's happening all across the country in smart growth areas and revitalization areas and smart city areas and everything else, what really happens to people in those areas? More often than not, a piece of property might be worth $500,000, and we put a transit station of some type right next to it, and we invest in that entire corridor. all of a sudden that property easily is worth $25 million, but what happens to the people all along there? The housing prices go up, they go so high that people cannot afford to live there. They then must move further out, and wealthier people come in there, and we have added to the problem of equity. And so a fundamental question I think really should be asked. It's not just about transit areas. This was Greenville, South Carolina, where they made a major investment to take advantage of their natural landscape and so on. And in doing so, the whole area around here became extraordinarily expensive. I tell people about the U Street corridor, which was burned out in Washington, D.C. during the riots. For years, for decades, no one would live there. Then a major revitalization occurred, and today you cannot buy a one-bedroom condominium in the U Street corridor for under $600,000. And so what has really happened? All of those people that lived in that corridor have now moved out to Charles County or Prince George's County, 25, 30 miles away, and now must take some type of transportation decision to get back to their job where they used to live. And that's why I'm saying in the transportation decisions, we've got to improve the consideration of equity. Let me wrap up with this observation. Based on a goal of having shared prosperity, healthy communities, and looking ahead for the years, we really should hope something along the line. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see our regions, this region right here, with a growing economy, with shared prosperity, a healthy, inclusive place for people to live, and a transportation system that works for all of the citizens. It can be done, but in terms of coordination, what we need, number one, is leadership. Number two is to clearly set the goals or the vision beyond transportation construction, but say other goals and visions and how does transportation use it. And then number three, to implement a coordinated plan using these goals and visions and not the typical construction per mile cost visions. Do that and you will turn around just about every community in a dramatic way in a decade to a decade and a half. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here tonight.
I'm not going to pick your pocket. There we go. Thanks, sir. Governor Paris Glendening, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to cover here in a short time. I want to bring up our second panel to talk about intergovernmental and cross-sector coordination from a Tennessee perspective. If y'all just come up as I introduce you, Mr. Clay Bright, Tennessee's Commissioner of Transportation and the head of TDOT. Alan Borden is the Deputy Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. You just go down there next to him, please, sir. Ashley Northington is a former journalist turned entrepreneur who has engaged in advocacy work on issues ranging from public education to affordable housing. She served as the small business team lead on Nashville's recent task force for transit and affordability, currently chairing the Minority Business Advisory Council. Just hop down there. Steve Bland is the CEO of WeGo Public Transit, where he oversees the management of Nashville's local transit system as well as the services of the Regional Transportation Authority. Steve Bland. And Todd Rolap is a managing partner at Bassberry & Sims, chair of the Moving Forward Initiative, facilitated by the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce and its partners. Todd. Ask each of you to clip those microphones onto your lapel and turn that switch on the top to the on position. I think you're going to see a little green light when you do that. I'm going to start with Commissioner Bright. Boy, have I spent a lot of time talking to people at TDOT over the years. I love your cameras, though. Really good folks that do that. We appreciate it. TDOT, well known across the nation as one of the best agencies for maintaining assets. Since you became commissioner, We've heard you emphasize the importance of TDOT working more closely with local partners to address concerns about traffic congestion and roadway safety. What should we expect to see from TDOT as a partner in this effort under your leadership, sir?
So as far as the leadership part of it, you know, TDOT is in an enviable position. We've got a lot of good things we've done over the years. We're a pay-as-you-go state, so we're continuously ranked #1 financially across the country. And our infrastructure is, last week it was ranked #1, Georgia was #2, so infrastructure, we're always in the top 5. So we have done a lot of good things over the years. So I think we need to pat ourselves on the back, but in my short...
Yeah, go right ahead.
So in my short time at TDOT, I mean, we've got a lot of great people there, and I'm asking ourselves, how can we improve ourselves? You know, what can we do to have continuous improvement and to raise the bar at TDOT? So you heard Governor Lee's thoughts on the start of this meeting, but how can we lean in and how can we do what he's asked us to do, is to take a leadership role and to help in the planning process that's about to occur.
Very good, thank you. Steve, your organization responsible for delivering public transit services to the city and region. Ultimately, you may be asked to oversee construction of some rapid transit projects to provide relief to congested roadways. How do the relationship between WEGO, TDOT, and local governments need to evolve in order for this to be a reality?
Well, I think they need to evolve. They need to continue to evolve, and they are evolving. I would say over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've had more collaboration with TDOT, with local departments of public works than we have, frankly, in history. But what I took away from Governor Glendenning's remarks is those partnerships have to extend really way beyond that to other entities and to common goals. And I can give you an example. In our bus system redesign project, Better Bus, one of the things that folks have called for is significantly extended service hours. Our service, by and large, cuts off at about 11 o'clock. From a transit operating perspective, adding service hours, as long as you have the resources, is a relatively simple thing. But when you deep drill into that and you find, well, people might not be all that comfortable walking home from the bus stop at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, either maybe it's a dark intersection on a high-speed road that needs to be crossed, or maybe the public safety element needs to be upgraded, or street lighting, that those partnerships really have to develop. And we have to work around shared, common, individual-based mobility goals, as opposed to, and I heard it from both the governor and from Joseph, rather than our traditional metrics of how a transportation system is supposed to work.
Very good. Alan, from a state perspective, from an economic community development perspective, how important is this idea of solving the transportation challenges in Middle Tennessee to our economic success?
Dave, from what we do and what we see and what we work with each and every day, it's extremely important. And the reason I say that is, in order for us to continue to be successful in economic development, there's certain ingredients that we must deliver to our customers each and every day. The first ingredient is an address, right? So whether we're recruiting new investment to our state, new companies to our state, or we're working with existing companies to help them grow and expand, they must have a place to do that. So that meets their criteria. So that's one ingredient you absolutely must have. The second ingredient, which is probably the most important thing that we must be successful in, is workforce development. So we've heard a little bit about that earlier today, but talent and workforce is the talk of every single project that we deal with. And we must be able to demonstrate to these companies, again, whether it's a company that we're recruiting new to Tennessee or we're working with an existing company to help them grow and expand, we've got to be able to demonstrate to them that we can deliver the talent and workforce that they need when they need it with the skill sets that they need. Now, when you start talking about the delivery of that workforce is where transportation, accessibility, and mobility comes into play. And I can assure you that every single definitely every single middle-sized project and major project that we work on, transportation is a very timely subject, and it's something that these employers want to know that we're going to be able to address. Now, the good news is that to date, we have not lost any major investments or recruiting projects due to transportation issues. I say yet, but it is definitely a part of the dialogue. I think that these companies that are investing here, it's on their minds. We discuss it all of the time, and I feel like this is a very timely topic that we're discussing here today, so very important.
Good, good. Todd, you're chairing a regional initiative called Moving Forward that is focused on helping private sector leaders better understand their role in shaping mobility solutions. What do you want the audience here today to know about that? How does it support enhanced cross-sector collaboration?
Sure. Moving Forward exists really to engage the business community, business and other community leaders in this discussion. We heard Governor Lee talk about the need for leadership, and I think Moving Forward is essentially the business community's effort to engage and to provide some leadership in this process. It started really out of years and years of chamber trips to peer cities and peer regions, and during those trips it became quite clear that it was important in the development of a good plan and on this issue to have an independent, strong group of business and community leaders very engaged. So that's sort of the origins of Moving Forward. What I would also want people to know is as we review plans, as we participate and provide input, as we set goals, we're sort of guided by some important values. Regionalism, we think we always need to keep that in mind. This is a great event from that standpoint. Collaboration, we want to participate and collaborate with policymakers, with the public sector and community leaders as business leaders. Equity, you heard Governor Convening talk about equity. I think that's an important part. By equity we mean making sure that access to jobs, to education, to networks is available to everybody based on their needs. It's not necessarily, everyone gets treated equally, but it's based on what people need. Accountability, I think what we're going to do is when we review plans is we're going to promote accountability on use of funds, accountability on follow through on plans. That's very important to the business community. And then most of all, urgency is an important value or principle for our work. This problem is urgent. You heard, I think it was Joseph said, businesses will pay in this dialogue. This is important to us. It's important from our workforce standpoint. It's important for our recruiting. We're very focused on it, and we feel a sense of urgency and want to promote that in our work as well.
Thank you. Ashley, we all are talking so much about infrastructure, but the fact is that working on infrastructure displaces people sometimes. If you look at what happened to Nashville when the interstate highways were built, it's disrupting to people's quality of life. As we look to expand transportation options, what kind of advice can you give us on how best to coordinate those decisions with communities that don't want to lose more than they gain from the progress?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think too often when we are having these types of conversations and talking about making these big ticket decisions, we end up doing it in ways that inadvertently perpetuate this sort of us versus them mentality, or they split us into teams like who's for something or who's against it, when we know that the issues are greater and more nuanced than that. Many times we end up coming into the communities with a few listening sessions facilitated by these visual representations of the community members without actually really listening to them or involving them on the conversations from the start. And then especially when we talk about transit, oftentimes the conversation is typically focused on like whether we're going to talk about bus or rail or whatever the mode of transportation is, or traffic or congestion, instead of talking about what transit is really about, which is access and opportunity and economic equity, and ultimately what I like to say, lives enhanced. But I think that we do have a great opportunity to do better. And I think that there are 3 things that we can do to move us in that direction. The first thing I think that we have to do is that we have to get real and get honest about past historic wrongs. The reason why we have lots of people, especially in Nashville, who are really leery of the conversation around transit is because they remember the last time, like when the interstates were built, and how their communities and their social capital and their economic community was devastated because of it. We have to approach the conversation with empathy and with understanding. We have to say, hey, we acknowledge that this thing happened. This is what we're doing to prevent that from happening again, and this is how we want to involve you and how we move forward together. We have to just get real about addressing the elephant in the room. The second thing that we have to do is we have to get serious about inclusion. And I don't mean, just inviting people to the proverbial table. What I mean is really getting an understanding and listening to people about what they actually need. Too many times we go into communities and we tell them what is going to be good to them. Well, people know what they need to be successful, and we have to be diligent about asking them what they want, and it's our job to help see if we can provide that. I think that when we have more community engagement from the start from multiple different types of people, we end up getting better plans and better outcomes. And then the third thing that I think we need to do to get that community buy-in and support is that we have to get really clear about changing the conversation around what transit is. In Nashville, what we saw a lot of conversation around was traffic. Well, we know that traffic is a thing, and we looked at the pictures earlier today, and traffic has always been a thing. That's not what's going to inspire people to want to embrace this and want to do something better. We have to really get focused on how transit can provide a pathway to prosperity, how it can talk about workforce development, how it's an access to education, how it is all about how we can level the playing field so that everyone has an equitable opportunity to participate in the prosperity of this region.
Thank you very much. We could drain the brains of this panel for a long time and still not learn everything that they know, and we're running out of time this morning. But please thank our panel very much for the ideas that they have put before us. We really do appreciate it. If you would all take your mics off and switch them off there and leave them on your seats. Thank you very much. All right. We have reached that thing we all talk about in transportation called the last mile. But could we have another round of applause for our keynote speakers and our panels for the great job they've done for us this morning? Really good stuff. To drive us home, I will welcome to the stage the mayor of the town of Smyrna, the chair of the Regional Council's Transportation Policy Board, Mary Esther Reed.
Okay, we're on the downhill slide here, folks. As a former teacher, I know when your backsides got numb, so did your brain. So just hang with me here. One of the things as a teacher, I always like to make sure whenever I had a lesson or a project that you learned something. So if you learned something new today, raise your hand. If your neighbor does not have their hand up, reach over and tell them what you learned new, because obviously they were not listening. So I'm glad that you all learned something new today. And I think the one thing we all know by now is that transportation is an issue here in Middle Tennessee. More than ever before, I feel like We can solve this problem together. We have to do it together. I'm here today representing my community, the town of Smyrna, but I'm also here representing the city and county mayors who serve on the Regional Council's Transportation Policy Board. Some of you might know that the Transportation Policy Board, by its federal designation as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for Nashville and the surrounding counties. The MPO is empowered by federal law to serve as the primary forum for collaboration among local and state officials in order to negotiate a mutually beneficial plan to invest in our roadways, in our bridges, in our public transit all across Middle Tennessee. It's made up of mayors, it's made up of our TDOT commissioner, and representatives of county highway departments and public transit agencies. We're also joined at the table by representatives of the Federal Highway and the Federal Transit Administrations. In 2016, our board adopted the current transportation plan to direct more than $8.5 billion in federal grants and matching funds into our area's transportation system through the year 2040. And let me tell you, 2040 is going to be here before we know it. And just 2 weeks ago, we took a vote to approve about $1 billion of this funding to be put to work across our area between now and 2023. How many knew that? If you're on that board, please shake your head yes, that you know that. Okay, but the one thing we all know is a plan has a shelf life. We're here today to ask for your help. We need your help in partnering with us to update this plan. Markets have shifted. Additional issues have emerged. New tools have been developed, and more people want to be involved. Too many people have no idea about the regional strategy. They're unsure of what our responses to transportation challenges will be. Now, Brian Hercules is our town manager. Brian, everybody in Smyrna knows what we're doing with transportation in Smyrna, right? Absolutely. I'm sure in Murfreesboro with Mayor Shay McFarland, they're not sure. So we want to make sure that local communities are clear in coordinating with others or the state or the private sector in a way that will lead to transformative change. We owe it to citizens to get this right. We have to be visionary, we have to be inclusive, and we have to be comprehensive. We owe it to them to have an honest conversation about fiscal constraints. I don't know about you all, we have a few fiscal constraints in the town of Smyrna. So we have to be honest with them about those fiscal constraints and limited capacity to deliver big projects overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. We must all have an open mind. Who in here has an open mind? If your neighbor doesn't, hold their hand up for them. And try something new to put skin in the game. So, this is our ask. Join us in solving Middle Tennessee's transportation issues. I have 5 challenges for you today. How many? 5. Ooh, you guys are listening. Y'all are good. Mayor Moore, challenge number 1. Good. Mayor Moore, you are good. Challenge number 1. Let's work cooperatively across political boundaries, levels of government, socioeconomic groups, and economic sectors to identify a shared vision for our region. Mayor Moore, can you do this? Yes? Can you do it? Bring us together? He can do it. Mayor Graham, Spring Hill. Challenge number? Dose. Good. Let's be ready to prioritize our transportation needs based on real-world constraints and limitations. But let's be willing to negotiate and execute on strategies to overcome those obstacles so we can do the things that need to be done. Mayor Graham, can you do it? You can do it. Together. Steve Bland, challenge 3. Very good. You did well in kindergarten, didn't you? Not so much in first grade. Let's keep in mind that we're working to make Middle Tennessee a place that our children, our grandchildren will want to call home. We all have immediate needs that must be addressed, but let's tackle those in a way that is incremental to our long-term goals. Steve, can you do it? Together. Let's see, I saw him back there. Did he leave? Oh, Mayor Billy Vogel. Challenge number 4. Good, Mayor. Let's think comprehensively about the relationships between transportation decisions and those related to housing, the economy and jobs, land use and community design, environmental quality, historic preservation, social services, and other issues important to Middle Tennesseans. Mayor Vogel, can you do it? There you go. There you go. Good for you. And last but not least, challenge number 5. Mayor Heather Brown? Which one? 5. Let's have fun. You know, I understand that there's a sense of urgency, the frustration with the lack of resources, the anxiety of getting out of your comfort zone, but we should be inspired by this challenge, not scared and not overwhelmed by this. Mayor Brown, can you do this? Good for you. So, we have great professional staff within our local governments and here at the Regional Council. We have a tremendous asset in the Tennessee Department of Transportation. We have enormous leverage across the sections of leaders in this room. Look around. Look how many assets we have right here in this building. We have the right ingredients to make this work. So, as you leave here today, I encourage you to read the handout about the current plan. I encourage you to use the transit fare card to experience mobility without your car. Did you hear it? Without your car. Get out of your comfort zone. And visit solvethistogether.org. Tomorrow and in the coming days, as we dedicate the website to serve as our shared laboratory for the brainstorming ahead of us. I want to say a very special thank you to the governor, to our guest speakers, and to all of you for being here. And let's give a round of applause to the staff for putting all of this together. I can't tell you how grateful I am to them for all the long hours and support of our efforts. I also want to recognize Dave Nichols for your exceptional work as today's MC, so thank you for that. It's always good to hear your voice outside of rush hour and to put a face and a voice together. So I want to thank you all for being with us, but I'm going to ask Dave to have the final words. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mayor. That's the dark side of transportation. I know I heard a mayor thrown under the bus there in the middle of what she said. Didn't I? Did I hear that? That is not what buses are for. Naughty. Naughty mayor. You have at your table a bus cookie. I want to point that out. In case you didn't know, that's not an eraser. That's a cookie. But we can do better than that, so we have a closing reception that I'm going to send you off to in just a second. I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for your commitment to moving forward together. As the mayor said, remember to stay connected at solvethistogether.org. It has been a very informative morning. I have learned a lot, and I don't have the power to do anything, but many of you do. So let's get her done, all right? On behalf of the 93 board members and 80-member staff of the Regional Council, we thank you for being here today. Please travel safely. Thank you very much.